One thing I've learned, if you don't hold their feet to the fire, everybody gets burned.
Hold on. Before you start waving around that freedom of speech thing, when you're in a crowded movie theater and you scream fire, you better be able to smell smoke. You come on this radio show and you start saying incandescent things like that, you better have more behind you, pal, than just your thumb. I've been listening to talk radio for years, and one thing I just can't stand is when the host has to, push his way onto people, beat the callers into his way of thinking, extending his ego, or when the callers call in and say something so outrageous and the host lets it go unchallenged. The sign you're on the road to truth is the lack of contradiction. You want to find truth, you just don't simply believe somebody because of their authority or their degree, or you listen to what they say, you test it against reality, and you hold their feet to the fire. We are back and we are live, feet to the fire. I'm your host, James Othrianchik, the Black Knight. Talk Radio live going around Chicagoland area and have been since 2003. I've been off a couple of weeks doing a whole lot of stuff, but I got more work that I have to do than I have really all my life. That kind of limits things, but here I am. And what brings me to use your time today is to I've had two books that I've been reading. Well, I take that back. A book and a very long video. And I just kind of follow a stream of consciousness in terms of things like there's a book about mythology. I thought I would get it. Now, it's not how I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be something just basically telling me the stories and who, where, and how. And this ends up being more of a history of the mythology, and as the myths pass from culture to culture, as one dies out and another one comes in, etc., and how they're changed and altered, and it ended up being more practical use for me than just simply a kind of a run through the history stories. And I'll get to that in a minute. And the second thing was, I saw this video. I have the link down in the notes. It is on YouTube, still is. I did download it. If it does disappear, I will put it up on my BitChute site. Because it's something you really should watch. It's 5.5 hours long. So it took me 3 days. And a lot of it I just listened to, which is okay because while he uses the video format to show the text from the books that he's quoting, and also to show a plethora of pictures of well-known people throughout history giving the secret signs to let others know in the other secret groups or whatever that they are in. And there's an awful lot of video pictures, and there's actually video and audio quotes to back this stuff up. What the story in this guy is that he was a X Factor winner, I believe X Factor Australia. He's from Australia anyway. I didn't see it. I don't know about it. And he was a performer, had a band, and he made records and apparently millions. And he was indoctrinated in the Masons, the high level Masons. And then he had a turning point in his life when he was in a car, was going 120 miles an hour, as he says, toward a brick wall. And in a flash, before he hits the wall, God showed him a bunch of stuff, I guess. And you can listen to it to get the details on that part. And he hit the wall and survived. And then in that case, became a Christian. And he rejected all of the Masonic stuff. He lost his band and contracts and whatnot. And he just recently, at least it seems to be that he just did this video. I happened to bump into it on YouTube, and it's only a couple weeks old. And he wanted to reveal all this stuff. Now, it's a little dramatic at times, but, give him that. That's fine. And it's redundant, and that's fine, too, because there's so much to hear it over and over again. It's not a bad thing. And there's just a ton of information in there. And I think that this video should be the, Masons 101, or I'm gonna go a little further than it, because he was focusing on Masons, but what he showed in there, which really tied into what I mentioned about this book on mythology, what he wrote in there was he had people of other groups, Zionists, Marxists. You have Hitler and Napoleon and Stalin all giving some of these hand signs. Some of the signs I saw might be explained off as passing, like a moving picture. He took a still, maybe a couple like that, but there's so many of them that some of them are obvious. These artists, especially artists, music artists or movie artists, are posing with these certain signs to publicly declare their allegiance without saying anything. And if you don't know what those signs are, you just might see them around and go like, well, that's a popular sign to do when you're making these pictures. But in reality, what it apparently is there's certain signs that you can give out in public that will let others in these fraternities know that you're a brother, sister, or whatever, without letting the masses know. And it goes through great detail in explaining how you're not supposed to let the vulgar know. And so what I'm going to be talking about is how all these correlate what's going on. One good thing I saw in that is by him not just focusing on Masons proper, but going across, China, communism and whatnot, talking about these things, Republican, Democrat, Christians, having them do these signs, some Hindus, Muslim, they're all doing these signs. And what I'd like to say that don't focus on the Masons. And one of the problems I see when I hear people talk about the Masons, the Zionists, Catholic Church, or the I can't think of their name now, the secret society in the Catholic Church. When you think of these certain things, you focus in on that one. Like my favorite example that I talk to people was when they blame the Jews for everything. The Zionists. Well, there's problems in all of these groups, but it's not just them. And if you focus on one group, you're going to miss the others. So it's multiple groups that are working together and rivals at sometimes together. So there's this kind of like tectonic shifting going on for these various groups. Some may have a handle on certain parts of our work, some others. But what they all have in common is a conscious or subconscious allegiance to Satan, who is at the top of this, or Lucifer, as he's called in the Masonic words, light bearer, and so on. These are whether it's literally named or whether or not you're looking, look for higher power. You can look, the secret, where you have this power within you, and you can call upon saints, praying to saints, praying to Guruji, gurus. When you have groups, you put it all together, and what I was doing was all these different things were just they're like layers were floating around and creating a picture. And when I was seeing this stuff, it all made total sense. The problem is, if you're in any one endeavor, there's going to be things that are going to be contradicting or at least incompatible or will be frictional with your I can't think of the word now. Doctrine. So if you are a particular denomination in Christianity, or your particular, even when you get into Muslim, you have the various factions that are fighting one another. If you're going to be in a particular faction and I'm talking to you, you're going to say, no, that's not right. That's not right, because part of your group has overlapped into these ancient myths, secret societies, beliefs, what have you. And a lot of people want to put together, and I'm like this, right? So I've had to go over the years, after bumping my head against the wall, being submissive to both trusting God to get information to me and the lack of contradiction as a guide in understanding things, and making myself submissive to that lack of contradiction. Whenever I'd get to an area, I'd like to pick this way. Sounds good, but there's a couple of problems. So you can't pick that way. No matter how much it fits other ways, you can't just ignore the anomalies. The anomalies are the real guides to finding truth. And so you have to keep fluid. And literally what I've done is I've reconstructed a theology based on all of these areas that is, as far as I know, and I'd be willing to talk with somebody about it, is non-contradictory. It does have Jesus coming to earth and sacrificing himself as well as teaching for multiple purposes. So I'm a Jesus follower, and in that aspect, I would say I'm a Christian, but it depends on what church you're going to. Now, I don't want to get bogged down in that. My whole point of going in this was to go into some of this theology, and with the Masonic stuff in there. Plus, I'd recommend you guys watch this video. You have to buy the other book. The book is called Don't Know Much About Mythology, and I got links to it. So you'd have to buy it, I guess, to read it. I listened to it on Audible, so you can't really have access. But the link, you might get some information out of the link. But this video is free to do on YouTube. And one of the things that he points out on the video, I'm going to go back and forth to mythology in the video, with all these handshakes and hand signs and all this stuff being part of, and he goes into the Mason actual doctrines written by Manny P. Hall and a couple other people that I don't recognize their name, though I guess they're prominent in Masonic writings back in the 1900s. And of course, Aleister Crowley. And so he's quoting these individuals who are the big individuals in Masonic traditions. It also goes a little bit into the various other Masonic. You have the various Masonic camps in various cultures too. So, but my point on this is that it's a fraternity, and that people will admit that's fraternity, Skull and Bones fraternity, and if you go to Notre Dame, for example, and you're the company that you're applying to, the owner or one of the correct people you're talking to are from Notre Dame, they would hire a Notre Dame person rather than you name it, whatever. There's a bunch of societies that work together. But my aspect with this one is, for example, you don't even have to know that you're part of the society, or at least being manipulated by them. So you look at these musicians and some of these actresses, they're posing given these Masonic signs. Now, is that, the assumption by the author of the video is that they are indoctrinated, they have been, what's the word, man? Losing the words. They have been initiated into Masonry, And this is why they're giving the signs. Now, while it does say in the books that you're not supposed to do, you're not supposed to let the vulgar know. This could be a signal. Like, for example, if you're going to be a recording star, and you have Masonic contacts throughout various record stations or streaming systems now, or by you giving these signs, not knowing what they are, being a vulgar, as they say in there, or goyim, other phrases like that, goya, by not being, you're letting them know that their handlers are, so you're putting that sign out there, and they're okay, we'll play that person on the radio, we'll pay, because they're official in the system, or they could actually be in the system and are doing it themselves. I mean, either way, it doesn't matter much to me when I'm looking at it. Is that when you see all these signs, you can't explain them away. When you have the person looking through their, like the OK sign, and you're looking through your eye on that, and when you have like decades of people in music, movies, and whatnot all doing that, it's got to mean something. And so it's explained in these books that actually it's the three fingers sticking out are the 666, and then the eye of Horus, or whatever you want to call it, all-seeing eye. And, people could do that because they saw John Lennon was doing that back in Hard Day's Night, And so you go back to this, no one, I didn't know what it was, But was he part of it? Was he giving a sign from his own self, or was it part of the system around him? I don't know. And I'm not trying to excuse him. I'm not trying to say, I'm just, I'm trying to look at it and just saying all the possibilities here that they have. Hey, got Kelvin in the chat room here. Guess he's off today, being the holiday. Not out peddling. It's an inside term for someone who's picking up and delivering in the trucking. So, welcome listening. So when you have all these things together like this, there is a real secret society, if you will, behind all the things. This is not conspiracy theory. This is not crazy. It's so blatantly obvious that when you do go through and look at it, you have to be blind to not correlate it. How do you explain it off? Well, it's just the in thing to do. Well, why is it the in thing to do? You could, many of these other signs or no signs could be the in thing to do. So you have, and then you see these signs occurring throughout. You have Billy Graham in the Christian ensemble doing it. You have some of the yogis doing the same kind of signs. And it's not that they're Masons. And this is my point I want to get across, and maybe I'm being awkward, but rather than look at them as Masons, look at them as this greater, broad, secret society that has traveled through culture after culture after culture. You have the Greek, the Roman gods were from the Greek gods, and you have them from the Mesopotamian gods, which go back to Sumer, goes back to Enki and Elil, and you have the Jewish, and then Egyptian has theirs, and they correlate with each other. You could see this, and I'm not good at remembering the names, and they're all. But in these book about mythology, you have this god is this god in another culture, and it's like when this culture took over this culture, they brought with some of the gods and they mixed them together. So some gods appear now and throughout time and all this stuff. Now, I'm not saying that these are real gods that actually fought and were trying to get the new cultures. I mean, that's not what I'm saying. And I'm not saying that these gods weren't based on somebody at some time or something at some time. I'm not even going to go there. I mean, that's a whole can of worms to talk about that you can't really solve. But what I do see is, why would you keep these certain, sex cult and blood sacrifice things? Why would those transfer from culture to culture, even though you have different names of gods, and some of the gods have been different, some have been put together, they've been combined, some have lost certain traits but have others, and they go through all of history, up now and including Masonry, the Rosicrucians, Rose and the Cross, all these, the Illuminati, all these people along the way had these secret things, and they carried them forward. And if you look at them, the two that stick out with me, that correlate to all space and time up to now, including now, is sex cult and blood sacrifice, whether it be sacrificing animals or humans. Those are the two things that correlate through there. Now, if you want to look at the reality of all of these things, if you look at it from a satanic point of view, and I'm talking about the individual or being or group of beings called Satan or whatever that the biblical devil, let's say the devil, right? Let's just use that as a generic term, because I don't want to get bogged down in certain terms, because people can argue that, well, Lucifer is one person, Beelzebub's another person, they got all these different things. And I go, look, I don't want to get bogged down into that. I want to step back and look at the archetypes of these individuals and what they stand for. And so with the sex cults, it breaks down the whole aspect of a moral family, staying together, raising their kids, being chaste, so that you're not making other children with your DNA that aren't going to be raised properly or don't, or have, this type of idea. And by ruining yourself by having high energy sexual energy transfers with all kinds of people anywhere and everywhere, you actually ruin the mechanism on it. I mean, this is what I have found. I'm looking at this, and I've made these decisions. I'm not for sale, and I'm not trying to defend them. I'm just bringing them out there, and you could do what you want with them. So when you have somebody who's promiscuous, there is an energy bond that happens when some people have sex, and which is, you could explain why the whole aspect is tied into procreation. So what these cults have done over the years is to corrupt that by making temple prostitutes and all this stuff. Well, by having this wild sex, you are now going to have a good year. You're going to have good crops because of this. It's going to be, because the crops will reproduce and grow. I mean, this is a logic that was done on there, but that's the front veneering of it. But the underneath is what it's doing is destroying the energy, love energy connection, and simple energy, this energy connection through this that was designed to have a special reaction with your mate or what have you, so that it could be, it grows, and it's also a divinity type of sharing. Like when you have two people in love who are sharing, have sexuality, you're sharing your divine connections as well. I mean, I don't know the details, right? I don't get, and this is one of the problems with all kinds of doctrines and cults, is they get all this, they go in and fill in all these details, and they're all wrong, or they're all off, but it fits nice, and then you get off on a tangent, and now you're in some kind of sex cult, and you're in the same negative, bad stuff that all of these cults, all of them go through, which is what, of course, the devil wants you to do. Wants you to break down. Wants you to make the choice on your own to do this and come up with some kind of rationale or some kind of emotional tie or even a pseudo-spiritual tug that will bring you down into a destruction. And this is what all these have to do. And of course, we have sacrifices. You have it in the all of these things, sacrificing animals. And then some of them actually sacrifice humans. And the whole idea of appeasing a god by killing an innocent, unrelated person just to give the blood or burn it on an altar for the sweet smell of it is to me repulsive. But that's what they want you to get. And it happened in Judaism, where you had given animal sacrifices. Now, in the Bible, Jesus is recorded of being upset in the temple, and it's whether or not if it was kind of like blurred out in the writing of it, or if we're supposed to use our minds and hearts to deduce it. What was he upset about? These animal sacrifices and or the money changing going on. Now, money changers have been mentioned, but accounts have him releasing the animals. So, if you look at the pagan cults, if you have a you have God, the true creator God, right? And you're doing the same rituals to God that other ones do, sacrificing idols. No, but we sacrifice to a real God. Well, they think they're sacrificing to a real God too. So why is that blood sacrificing okay? It's not okay. And by looking back throughout history and seeing all of these cults going back thousands of years, all doing these same things, and then you look into and you go into Christianity, and you have Paul writing letters about the temple priests, priestesses, and sexual impropriety. You're talking about eating meat sacrificed to idols and all this. You have this stuff going on in the beginning, talking about it. Well, then it's cut off at the end of the canon, and that's it. And then we move on 2,000 years later, and you still have cults doing the same thing. And you have people who are Christians who are promiscuous or whatever. They're not sacrificing animals on the altar, but they are eating them. They are killing them and eating them in some kind of rituals. I mean, you might tie that in to some degree. So you have the idea is that to blame the Masons, they may be one of the better conduits for these old rituals. And I would also challenge that I'm not saying that they talk about demons and whatnot being invoked in these things. It could be. It's not necessarily needed, though. This all could be a rouge, if you will, to get people off the right spiritual track. And by simply coming up with a narrative and throwing in the emotional charge you get from doing that thing wrongly, there's a charge there that could be used in manipulation of it. Or, so that's why I wouldn't rule out real demons involved in things or being a twisted, emotional, spiritual, energetic in the human. See why I don't make demands on that. It's not that I'm being careful in case there aren't demons. Okay, I didn't say there was. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if you get bogged down in details, you get lost out in the other and say, well, our sex cult is different because we do it this way, not that way. No, it's still a sex cult. Or our aspects of doing blood sacrifices are different because we do it this way. We have a turkey at dinner or something. I'm just saying. I've just kind of come up with stuff. But for me, looking at this stuff, what's going on in the real world today is a bringing forward and putting out in the open what once was secret in these cults. I foresee down the line not only just the torturing and abuse of people who don't go along with the program, and in particular Christians. I see the opening for sacrifice in some form, whether it be openly, blatantly a human sacrifice, which I think would actually morph into whatever it starts out at, whether it be killing people because they're hate or whatever, it'll morph into that. So what you will find is, rather than pigeonholing one group that could be traced back to these times, you're going to find that the blurriness of the past becoming more clear in the present, so that the manifestation of these principles that have manifested in these various cultures, various ways, is manifesting, and has manifested in this culture. You will see it happening. You will look at the past. You'll see the past. If you're not too bogged by details, get the principles and watch how the principles come forward in our time. I look at it like somebody who's underwater with a slow motion camera. As they come up toward the surface of the water, they start to get more detail. You could see it's a human. Okay, it's a woman. And then when their face breaks the water, you could see who they are. Or another way to look at it is where you have the lens blurred. You can see things and moving around and all that. And as the lens gets clearer, you'll start to see how is it manifest this time in our world. Because, burning things on the altar back then, being more of a common thing amongst the various religions, wasn't a big deal, even when it started burning people, But it doesn't happen a lot in our culture now, right? So it'll start manifesting in our world at a certain way, and then it'll move probably back to the old ways, because each group along the way somehow gets back to that way. So ultimately speaking, you're going to be looking at these various sex cults and sacrificing cults will start to happen here. And so it's not that we're arguing that it's Zeus versus Jehovah. We're not saying, well, that's a false god, a real god. You have to even look in Jehovah, if you're familiar with the book Holy Virus, look at holyvirus.com. Is it .com or .net? Forgotten. I'll have to put it in there. Just Lionel Parkinson, Holy Virus. He does a great job of explaining how these old Babylonian cults actually worked their way into the Old Testament. So that some of these creatures, the blood sacrifices and whatnot, are holdovers from Babylon. And if you think about it, Israel was conquered, brought to Babylon. All the teachers, preachers, and government guys, all would be killed, and the rest would be in slavery. And after 70 years of Babylonian rule, you don't have any of the authentic religious leaders from before they went to Babylon. So now you have, if you look at some of the ones like Ezra, for example, that's a Babylonian name. So you end up having this kind of blending into how it happens. And so if you look at the history, if you watch this book or listen to this book, don't know much about mythology, they go into great detail. Probably they have an agenda to perhaps poke Christianity and Judaism, but they bring up valid points where you have the things lapping over into Judaism and Christianity. And the simple argument is that, well, the Earth's 6,000 years old, and this is the stuff that happened in the beginning, and they're all copying it in their own way. Well, I mean, I can't say no to that, but the actual data in terms of finding it written down on the ground has it being the other way around. But I'm not bothered by that. It doesn't bother to me if early Judaism borrows from Babylon. It doesn't bother me, right? Because I'm not out doing the animal sacrifices, and I'm not depending upon the blood of that animal covering my sins. I guess would it be at that point? But I'm also looking at Jesus. One of the things that bother me about the Christianity in Jesus is that God demanded the death and the blood sacrifice of his son for our sins. It's always bothered me. Because I'm thinking, think about that in your own world. A guy, you demand, somebody did something wrong with you, and so you demand them kill his firstborn son for the debt that owes you. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me why God, ultimate knowing, ultimate loving, ultimate righteous, ultimate caring, all this stuff, would demand the death of his son. But after listening to this stuff and how these old cults work, I could see Jesus going through a ritual sacrifice following, the shedding of his blood to free those who follow him from the grip of the satanic cults. So it's almost like he played their game by their rules while playing God's game by his rules and won, which would also explain why he's so hated by the satanic cults. Because through Jesus and his sacrifice, in the satanic cult eyes, we have been freed. And by coming to Jesus, asking forgiveness of sins, if you look in by biblical verses, a contrite heart is better than blood sacrifices, burnt offerings. And Jesus says, "Hey, you're right. You're smart. You're not that far from the kingdom of heaven. Now follow me." Well, he couldn't because he had a lot of money and a lot of things to do, and so he showed that in that aspect, the worldly aspects of the world are getting in the way of the spiritual aspects. So, but very telltale though about him saying, Jesus saying, contrite heart is much better than sacrifice. Because that's the God part of this. We come to God and say, we're sorry for our sins. We can't do this right. We're going to constantly screw up. Please help us. And God accepts that. And especially if by honoring Jesus, who did the legal sacrifice on the worldly side, so that even by their own rules, they have to comply. The deep satanic leadership. And so they're all pissed off about it. You ever wondered why they were so mad at Jesus? Even when Jesus was alive, with the casting out of the demons from the pig, they were so, what have you done? What have you to do with us now before our time is up and all that? They're all kind of mad. They knew he had the power. They knew all of this stuff, but they were hoping it wasn't time yet. They ever got more time before they would be cast out or whatever. So you have this actual authority from God through the Son. It kind of passes through into the Son. So he comes in and he plays the ball by Satan's rules and wins, and plays by God's rules. And I don't want to use the word play. Maybe there's a better way. He follows the system, which is why he gave up his life. He could have been a great leader here. He could have been a great king. He could have done a lot of good things, in his own fleshly application of his spiritual holiness. But he followed the program and showed us a life and how we can emulate. Now, you look at the mythologists will say, see, Hercules was the son of God. And if you look at the Zeitgeist, it's a great example of that. 1/3 of the movie is dedicated to showing how many other spiritual, mythical people had similar traits. They had 12 disciples, born of a virgin. Father, God is the Father, whether it be Zeus or whoever. You have all these things. Well, what I maintain is Jesus was repackaged for a Roman world, and all those particular attributes. It doesn't matter to me if Mary was a virgin or not. It's not by the blood sacrifice in the heavenly sense that from a virginal birth, that all that stuff is legal mumbo jumbo. It's that the blood sacrifice frees us from the satanic stuff, and the contrite heart to God forgives our sins. Now, Paul, I think, was a little bit. He brought some of the Judaism into Christianity. He brought the blood sacrifice and had Jesus be the final blood sacrifice. Okay, I can see that working, going from one to the other, but I think that was a construct, because what he'd have to say is that because the Judaism cult was a blood sacrificing cult, like it was for Marduk and all these other guys in the past, well, now we're going to turn to Jesus. To me, it's just to me, it feels a little funny. And I know what I'm saying. A lot of the stuff people might consider it heretical and all this stuff, but to me, there's no contradictions. The contradictions come into when you take this into the realm of doctrine from particular denominations. For example, you have the Baptists think that Holy Communion is a remembrance. The Catholics think that it actually turns into the body and the blood that you're drinking. And the Lutherans say it turns into the body and blood once in your stomach, right? They're all the same Bible, the same group, same God, Christian, and, So it's up. What it's up to me is, having gone through many denominations and have my own world fall apart. I've had to start from scratch and refigure all this stuff out, and it's been 20 years, more than that. And so what I've done is I've had the lack of contradiction that thing. First of all, God is real and true, and lack of contradiction. Put those two together, and I let stuff come up to me, and I use that judgment. The attributes of God being all-knowing, all-loving. When he created everything, it wasn't like, oops, or it wasn't like, hey, I didn't see that. So everything that's been created, declared good, even though it fell, well, the good fall had to be known and was allowed. So you had to follow through that. From this, God will turn this all around, and it'll be an amazing thing that going through a fallen system actually created an end result better than not going through the fall system, except for the pain and suffering involved. God wanted us to eat from the tree of life, not from the knowledge of good and evil. Now, I want to say something. Those two books I just talked about, or that book I talked about with the myth, over and over again, I keep hearing people say they ate of the tree of knowledge. Like God wanted to prevent knowledge. It was even compared to Prometheus with fire. The gods didn't want man to have fire, and Prometheus was tortured and all this. God didn't want humans to have knowledge. That's not absolutely wrong. 100% wrong. It is perversionally wrong. The words in the Bible are, he wanted to not have the knowledge, eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So that because that was, whether real or metaphorically, by eating of that tree, you are now giving the statement, I want to know the difference between good and evil. And when I think of the word know of it, not just given the facts on a piece of paper. And so the human race is going through the personal knowing of good and evil. Explains a whole lot of stuff, doesn't it? God said, don't do that, do this. Go to the tree of life. We could have if the path would have been tree of life, he wouldn't have had to go through all this pain and suffering, understanding how bad evil was. We just go, okay, just tell us what's good and true, we'll follow it. Because we have faith and belief that if it was good, you would allow it, you would say people can do it. If it's not good, it all means it leads to harm. And that's what sin does. It leads to death. Death of relationships, death of your work, literally death of a child or of a loved one or yourself. So when you put this through together, it makes total sense to me that God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, and whosoever believes in him shall have eternal life, shall not die of eternal life. Well, that doctrinally has been worked with, but it's pretty straightforward. When God was able to manifest through Jesus in a perfect way, it was a conduit of both spirituality and knowledge and correction for the current times, correction of the religion of the time. Right from horse's mouth. I give a lot of credit to Jesus, the human, quote unquote, for allowing this to happen. How many of us have a perfect conduit to God, and whatever comes through our mouth is like God talking, or at least it's echoing, the human is echoing what God is. All right, how many people can say that? I mean, it's a fantastic thing. So it makes sense that Jesus, the man, would be glorified in the afterlife as being, the position he is. He's going to come back and claim the earth that he could have had because of the powers and knowledge he had at the time. But instead of just fighting and beating evil and sitting on a throne for a while, like many other kings have done, only, he went to the bigger picture of breaking the satanic hold on the earth while giving the good news that God didn't go away. God isn't gone. He's right here. God is like right there. There is a blindness between humans and God, because of satanic weaving, web weavings, net weaving, and all this stuff. And it's just like, break through that, and there it is. God's like, hey, been here the whole time. I've been walking with you the whole time. I've been experiencing things with you the whole time. It's just you haven't had this dialogic relationship with him. It's like God's up in the sky somewhere. No, he's right here. He's in you. All you have to do is reach there. You know, the New Age perverts this by saying that you are God. Reach within for your own power. Use the force that's within you. Well, you know, the problem with that is being a flawed human being and having the power of God at our disposal makes despots. And, you know, just ask them all along the way. Many of these, I just got done listening to the life of Alexander the Great. He was a very religious man. Yeah, and he was ruthlessly killing people, too. He was religious to the gods at the time, the Greek, Macedonian Greek gods. You even have Hitler talking about how the law of nature, which is another law of Masonic teaching, is the unwritten Bible, is nature unfolding. The strong survive. Hitler wrote in his book, Mein Kampf, if I attack my neighbor and I win, that's God saying, giving him blessing because you won. If you lost, you know, it's against God. So you have these despots throughout time using religion in their situation. Well, how do we know the right way to go? Well, you could choose a denomination and have some percentage of it right, or you could learn personally yourself, which is why all I can do is tell you what I've done, and you know, take what you want from it. I went through the Bible a zillion times. I had it on tape. I wore the tapes out. I've listened to the Bible so many times, and what that gave me was context of all the stories. And then after I did this for a while, I started focusing on Jesus because it appeared to me that Jesus was the clarifier and the maker, setter of right of what is coming out of Judaism. So there were problems with Judaism, and Jesus set it right. And the laws that would stay there, no jot and tittle, the laws would churn until the time comes, until, you know, he's talking about the law, which is something that the law of Moses is the assumption. But it's like you can follow the law of Moses and not be holy. And you could follow the law of Moses and be holy. And that difference is what he's talking about. Not doing the law, but doing the law in the principle it was meant to be. Now, I would add Lionel in there and say some of the stuff in the Old Testament is contaminated from Babylon. So rather than spend your whole life reading and learning Mesopotamian and all these other languages to try and figure out what that might be, you know, I've decided just to trust Jesus. I think Jesus did that work, both inner work and outer work. He probably had a lot of reading material he could add. And he was correcting and setting right, making right the principles that we need to do. So you don't have to be a Jew to have God. You talked about people being, you were born from Abraham, but there'll be people that'll come from the west and the east, meaning Gentiles, who will sit at Abraham when you were thrust out. So it's not about being a Jew. It's not about being a Catholic or a Baptist. It's not about being any of that. It's like, what do you believe about God? And this is where Jesus, I think, is the superior example of it. Superior over a Muslim or Hindu is that Jesus himself, through his sacrifice, beat the devil, the king of the world, the Lord of this world. And he also brings the words of reconciliation with the Father. And so now the blood sacrifice, finally, after all these years, makes sense to me. Of course, it's focused a little bit on uncomfortably. It's not that our Father, the God in heaven, our creative Father, Jesus, the one Jesus calls Father, he needed to shed his blood so he's not mad at us anymore. I don't think that's the case at all. which may be considered heretical in some places, and I don't care because I have to deal with God. I don't have to say, well, they said this over there. No, I want to know. Talk about experiential knowledge. I want to know God. And by going through this time, being alive and God showing me things, leading me, putting me in positions to read something or see something. And what I do with it, it's up to me. I'm sure I've missed things many times along the way, but I've also got things. And from that getting things and putting it together has allowed me to go forward, to come up with a comprehensive of what the gospel really is. The good news that God never left you, but the devil has put stuff in front of you and is distracting you by perverting some of the ways of living holy and perverting it to have destruction. And that's what the moral decline is people going through the satanically modified or diluted or masked actions in these areas and causing this fall. And if this is the end time, latter days, and Satan has been cast from heaven, like in Revelation, and he's on the earth, and woe to the earth because his time is short, it's going to get pretty bad. So knowing all of this, we can see what's going to happen. We're going to have a public time of going back to what these private, secret, mythologically based societies have been carrying forward quietly. There's going to come a time what was whispered in secret will be shouted on the rooftops. Never thought about that in an inverse thing, where the negative bad stuff, which was kept secret in the secret societies, is going to become public. And the Christians are going to be hunted again because they know the proper ways of God and love. Now, I didn't say perfectly, because, one of the things that's amazing with God is God chose those who were flawed. It's like God's so great, I'm going to choose all the, my baseball team is going to be full of people who can't play baseball, and yet I'm going to win. Because through training and teaching and all this stuff and growing on it, I'm going to create a great team. And if you just pick, it said that, I think it was in Gideon was waiting to fight, and they were greatly outnumbered. But then he showed him the angels that were going to fight for him. And from there was said something like, God doesn't want to pick somebody who could win on their own, because then they'll think they did it themselves and live in their own glory. He wants to pick people who, when they win, will go like, holy cow. God has to be in this, because there's no way he could have pulled this off. David and Goliath, for example. So this is where I'm looking at coming, is that what's coming down the pike is going to be the revival of these old ways that have been carried through these secret societies, which will then become out in the open, but their manifestation will be in line with today's stuff. The principle will be the same, the details may be different. So they're not necessarily going to erect a temple to Marduk or Molech or Baal or whatever. It might be a new thing. In fact, if you look at these old myths, they would create new gods sometimes. And it would be like they were always there, just recognizing them now. So you might have a whole new set. And when you have the Antichrist and all this scenario, that particular area will manifest in this time frame in its own personal type of manifestation, but the principles will be there. So one of the things I like, it says when you see the abominable desolation in the holy place, and then it's like a parentheses, let the reader be, understand. I think that was the people writing it down were going like, when they said this, you got to let the reader understand. We have to understand what that means. Now we can say, well, that means that we're studying in the Holy of Holies, that are going to rebuild the temple, and then the Antichrist is going to be in it. Maybe. Or it could be some, when I mean holy, it could mean a very important or sacred duty. And like I mentioned about the president being an empty shell. Who knows if that's a small version of it or if it is the version of it. So anyway, this is what I'm trying to get at. When you look at the Masons and secret societies, and you look at the Zionistic or communism, and you look at all these various points, there's a problem with picking one of them as being the ultimate, bad way, evil way, because they all have parts of it. It's kind of like the evil stuff was broken in the past, and it was kind of like it's rising again up through the conduits. It's coming through the woodwork like cockroaches, coming through the openings in the wall, and it's going to remanifest itself as a giant, one big cockroach or something, if you can use that kind of metaphor. But the goal will be it has to manifest out in the open. These things will done in the open and will be accepted. I mean, right now, they're killing children up to and including birth, and it's accepted. Now, it's not universally accepted, but if you go to Virginia, for example, it is. The doctor's not going to prison who gives birth in a late-term abortion and the child's alive and could be saved, and he throws him in a bucket, not going to jail. Now, some places he will, because it's not universally accepted, but it was not accepted anywhere before. When abortion was first coming out, it was kind of one of those quiet things that you want to just have the ability to, but you're not going to walk around strutting. Well, now they're strutting. Now they're shoving it up, going, no, we can, up until including this is what I mean about coming out into the light. And now when you have these missing children, what is it? 200,000 a year are missing? I mean, missing, never found. No bodies. It's like, where are they going? And this is what opens up the speculation for sacrifice. It's sexual abuse and use and then sacrifice. Who would do this kind of things? Go back to the secret societies. Go back to the old pagan religions. It was common for a man to have a young boy as a sexual expert. He would basically groom him. As we would use the groom, he would groom him for manhood. This was common. Of course, it's in the rich areas. The poor people are too busy working, I guess. But these practices were common, went underground during the Christian era. Of course, a lot of it's, you can see the stuff coming out about the Catholic Church in the background. Any powerful institution will be satanically ruled. It's inevitable. If it isn't, obviously, it's inevitable. Because psychopaths are attracted to power. More intelligent and committed psychopaths go up higher in the power structure because they're willing to do anything without any morals, and they're smart and intelligent, so they can figure stuff out. So the ones who are going to go to the highest are the smartest. And then eventually it deteriorates, the reverse happens. You get Caligula and all these other people. So anyway, I hope I gave you something to think about in terms of mythology and even early Judaism, but how Jesus is so important. The reason why he is so hated by the ancient groups is because of two things: his breaking of the blood vow with the satanic, with the Lord of the world, Lord of this world, and the reuniting of God, the obvious reuniting, and then the actual teachings of how to use these principles to grow yourself more holy and more with God. And the people who are using it to be sterile holy, and all they're doing is, like Jesus complained about the Pharisees, you're wiping the outside of the cup while there's still dirt inside. You're a whitewashed sepulcher with dead man's bones inside. So, that's why Jesus is such fantastic stuff. You can read the stuff. It applies to everywhere and everything. Because when you say truth, properly, truth, it applies everywhere. It applies 2,000 years later because the principle never changes. The law of these principles will never change jot or tittle. This is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. So when Jesus gives these principles, you live by them. If you don't, you will have harm. You will be harmed and create harm. It's just part of the deal. So check out that 5-hour video. I mean, the guy did a really good job, but you'd be surprised. You got pictures of the Beatles hanging, all 4 of them holding upside down crosses. And you could see like some of them were holding them and going like, wow, man, this is like, it was like, it kind of like, it was exciting and wrong at the same time. And some didn't care. Why would anybody do that if there was not somebody coaching, whether it be spiritually or otherwise, in an area? And you know, again, anybody like this one guy who's on there, he was a Mason, he did stuff, but he saw the light and changed. And he felt that he had to, because of this, he had to expose it. Now, you know, he also showed how he could be killed and have his head cut off, and that's why cutting off of heads, in particular, is a ritual thing. I'm going to sneeze here. Hold on. I sneezed so hard that I re-pushed the button on in the middle of the sneeze. So you're going to see these rituals coming back as well. We're headed into rough times, folks. And I'm not here to be negative about it. It's kind of like getting ready for it. Trusting in God, doing what you can to protect yourself and your family, but trusting in God and listening to that still small voice at the right time to say the right thing. That is the key to get through. That's where people who maybe don't have the money or didn't have the time to prepare what they may think properly, you still can get through this with God. And remember, getting through it isn't necessarily the goal. We're all going to die someday. So getting through it is to do the right thing at the right time. And the only great thing about it is if you survive going through all of this, you might be able to see from the human perspective the sky open up with the sun and the sign of man, and we might be able to see that, and that would be pretty cool. It might be worth the problem, but you're going to see other people leaving because they're just not up for it. It's not that it's bad; it's that they're not the ones that are supposed to go through this or can benefit from it. In other words, why do somebody gets ill and people pray for him, that person miraculously gets healed, other people they just die. Why? Why didn't the other guy? No. Well, maybe it wasn't in his best interest to continue living. I don't know all of this stuff. God knows this stuff. That's why I'm not picking my time to die. I'm going to do what I can and live as long as I can, but my goal is not to stay alive. My goal is to live properly. And where that live properly leaves, that's where it leads. I think I got through what I was going to say on here. Probably more to come. But anyway, it finally makes sense to me about the blood sacrifice, but it's not the way that most Christians think it. I don't know if that affects or offends people. Maybe you can write me and tell me what you think about it, but it was a legal maneuver in the laws of the Lord of this world that he won, freeing us. And that those who follow him are free from all. It doesn't mean they can't be harassed, of course. But this is what I'm thinking. All right, so I think I'm going to let it go at this point. Yeah, so I got links to that video. You can watch that. Again, it's 5.5 hours, but you can do it over a few days. A lot of stuff you put into it. I don't know if it's not there, I'll upload it to my BitChute account. So, alrighty. See you next time. God bless.
again, in ancient word of old, with wisdom for the new. Revive our inner sight, retell your timeless truths. Oh, ancient word.
Feet to Fire is a production of IPS Media Works on the OnSync radio network of stations.